We're now live, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Children's and Young Persons Scrutiny Board meeting on Wednesday, 24th of January. I'd also like to welcome members of the public who are watching on YouTube. Right, get straight on with it. Agenda item 1, substitutes nominated for this meeting and apologies for absence. Do we have any?
I've not been sent any substitutes or apologies tonight, Chair.
Thank you, Diane. Members' interest, to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests they may have in relation to the items included on this agenda. 3, admission of the public. It is not recommended that the public be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of the items of business on this agenda. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on 13th of December 2023 to be agreed as a correct record and signed by the chair. Is everybody in agreement? Yeah. Okay. Deputations. Do we have any deputations, Diane?
We've not received any deputations for this meeting, Chair.
Okay. Right. Before we start the meeting, could all members of the board and officers introduce themselves, please? Can we start with Julie?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Julie Jenkins. I'm the Director of Children and Young People Services for the Council.
Councillor Monteith.
I'm Councillor Brenda Monteith.
Harvey.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Pavin Active, Vulnerable Learner Service Manager and also the virtual school head in Calderdale.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Thank you. I couldn't think to turn my mic on to come up. Councillor Dot Foster, Ward Council for Sudbury Bridge.
Di Jury.
Good evening. Di Drury, Assistant Director for Early Intervention and Safeguarding Children's Social Care.
Thank you. Councillor Tremaine.
Good evening, Councillor Diana Tremaine, Ward Councillor for Tolberdon and CYP Deputy Chair. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Sheila.
Hi, I'm Sheila Hurst and I'm the Church of England representative.
Thank you, Sheila. Naomi.
Good evening, Naomi Marquez, Public Health Manager, leading on children and young people's public health.
Thank you. Adil.
Hi, I'm Adil. I'm from Calderdale Youth Council.
Thank you. Councillor Durrance.
Hi, I'm Councillor Durrance. I am a sub on this meeting, but I'm not here as a sub. I'm here as an invited attendee because I've been taking part in some of the work that we'll be discussing tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, Councillor Adam Wilkinson. I'm the lead member for Children and Young People's Services. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike.
Mike Lodge, I'm the Council's Senior Scrutiny Officer.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
I am Councillor Simon Ashton for Labour from the Salisbury Bridge Ward.
Thank you. Ben. Ben, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm Ben Marshall. I'm an Assistant Scrutiny Officer and I support the CYP Scrutiny Board.
Thank you. Hassan.
Hi there, I'm Hassan Nasser. I'm part of the Calderdale Youth Council.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Rahat Khan, Park Ward.
Claire Whiteley.
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm the worker that supports the youth council, so I just stay in the background and not that they ever need it, give them support if they need it.
Thank you. Councillor Beach.
Hi, good evening. Councillor Beach, Councillor for Elland.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson.
Good evening, Joe Atkinson, Councillor for Hippome and Lightcliffe.
Thank you. And David. David? Right, I'm not getting a response from David. That just leaves myself, Councillor Prashad, Councillor for Greatland and Stainland Ward, and Chair of Children and Young People's Scrutiny Board. Thank you, everyone. We've got a very intensive agenda tonight, which includes exclusion and suspension report and children looked after report, as well as an interim report on emotional well-being and mental health of children and young people in Calderdale by Councillor Diana Tremaine. I hope that you've all had the opportunity to read these reports prior to the meeting, as there is a great deal of information contained in them, which I'm sure you will have questions on. So without further ado, we'll go to item 6, which is the exclusion and suspension report 2022-23 from Julie Jenkins.
Thank you very much, Councillor Prashad. Councillor Wilkinson is actually going to make some introductory comments first to the Scrutiny Committee this evening, then myself, and then we can get into the detailed questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of make a few initial comments, really, from a sort of political perspective and a strategic perspective as lead member, really, before we get into the detail. So I think at the start of the municipal year, I did meet with the then Chair and Deputy Chair of Scrutiny and Scrutiny officers to sort of discuss the work plan for the Scrutiny Board for the year. And I'm always as sort of upfront as I can be about what I perceive to be some challenges that we're currently facing. And this was one in particular that I highlighted at the time. So I want to be really upfront with members of Scrutiny, basically, and say that, you know, we acknowledge that this is an area of concern for us, and I welcome the fact that Scrutiny are looking at it. And again, I think it's actually been picked up by some local media, the fact that Scrutiny are looking at this evening. And again, I think, you know, I'm always open to challenge, and I think it's really important that we're open and honest when we have got things that are of a concern. It is fair to say that there has been an increase in exclusions, school exclusions across the country in many boroughs. It's not just a situation that we see in Calderdale, particularly since the pandemic, it's a problem. And when you think about all the disruption that there was to the lives of children and young people during that pandemic, and the lack of routine that they had and the lack of support that they'd be used to in schools and elsewhere, it's probably no surprise then that there's been an increase in mental health problems amongst young people, and an increase in sort of behavioural issues and disruptive behaviour. We've also had the cost of living crisis as well more recently, and that's added more pressures onto families, which again can sort of manifest themselves in terms of behavioural issues in the classroom. At the same time, we've seen a huge increase in the number of children with special educational needs as well. And you looked at this in your last Scrutiny meeting and discussed the fact that there's a lack of capacity in our mainstream specialist school estate. So, you know, in Calderdale, we do try and be as inclusive as possible. And, you know, when pupils are able to thrive in a mainstream school, you know, that's fantastic for that young person. But there are some children where they have special educational needs where, you know, that isn't the case. And I think if you look at the report, there is a high percentage of pupils with special educational needs that are unfortunately being excluded. So I think that's obviously something that is of concern and needs looking at, and very much ties in with the issues that you were scrutinising at your previous meetings. I think it is important to note that although there has been increases in exclusions in many local authorities and across the country, it is particularly pronounced in Calderdale, and there are some quite big disparities between schools. And we've been doing some work we've set up a new Education Inclusion Partnership Board as a response to the issue, to try and sort of unpick why it is that there is this problem and why it differs from school to school. There are some quite specific individual issues in certain schools, so I would sort of be careful about casting judgments on particular schools, but I think it's fair to say that we do want to sort of foster a bit more of an inclusive culture throughout all of our schools in Calderdale. Obviously, the fact that nearly all of our secondary schools are academies does make it that bit more challenging to sort of agree a borough-wide approach and to engage with some of our schools. But I do think it's fair to say that we do have positive relationships with all our schools, even though whether they're academies or community schools, and we are working with them on this partnership board to try and address the issue. And the other thing we're doing is we've got a bid in with the DFE for an AP free school, which would be a massive game changer for us in order to increase the number of alternative provision places, so that when we do have children and young people that are not thriving in mainstream school, there are other options available to them. And the final thing is, obviously, which was mentioned in your last meeting, we are looking to increase capacity in the specialist school estate as well, by looking at other options other than just relying on the current provision in Ravenscliffe. So I hope I've sort of outlined some of the key issues there, and the fact that it is a key political priority for us, and some of the actions that we're taking to try and address it. But obviously, as I say, I do welcome the challenge from Scrutiny, and I'll hand over to Julie now for a bit more of the detail, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson.
Thanks very much, Councillor Wilkinson. A really helpful introduction. And we have had Councillor Wilkinson, as he's explained to you, sitting on the Inclusion Partnership Board right from the beginning. So it's good to hear from him this evening. But what I'd like to share with Scrutiny, just in terms of introduction, is there is a lot of work going on around making Calderdale and helping Calderdale schools to be more inclusive, both strategically and operationally. As Councillor Wilkinson has said, we know that COVID has had a huge impact on our young people and their emotional well-being. And I think the thing that stands out in this report is the significant rise that we've had in exclusions and suspensions year on year. So the data that you have in the report this evening is comparing ourselves with other councils up to 2022. We know from talking to other local authorities that this isn't just a Calderdale issue, it is a national issue, and lots of other councils' areas are struggling with the amount of alternative provision they can offer and the number of exclusions that they are trying to manage as well. The decision to exclude or temporarily suspend a child is the decision of the head teacher. That isn't something that the council or council officers can intervene in. You can see from the report there is quite a long list of issues and behavioural issues and assaults on pupils and staff, and some of the serious things that are happening within schools that head teachers are considering. When they make a decision to suspend, the parent can appeal against that decision, and then that will go to the governing body of the school to decide whether that suspension or exclusion stays in place. We do have a role once that permanent exclusion has been confirmed to provide alternative provision. And you will see that from the report that on day 6, we call it the 6th day that young person has not been in school. So basically after a week, it is for us to provide alternative provision. And we do commission the Whitley Academy to provide most of our alternative places, and they provide those places for primary, but in the main secondary children. And what we have tried to do, working with the Whitley over the years, is to try to get to a point where we can reintegrate young people who are then able to come back into mainstream. But you'll see from the report that number is quite low. So what we're seeing is the Whitley Academy becoming a school in its own right without the move on of children back into mainstream that we'd like to see. On the ground, we have put in quite a lot of support, and we want to get in early with schools before the situation becomes at the point where a suspension or permanent exclusion is being considered. So we do have education-focused people within our early help hub who are there to support schools before the situation, is starting to get any worse. With making sure we've got the help that they may need at an earlier stage for the child in school. We also have an exclusion officer who works for Parveen, whose role is to work alongside the school once a suspension is being considered. So that early help and advice line and the work that we're doing with schools is really important. The Education Inclusion Partnership Board that Councillor Wilkinson sits on is chaired by one of the CEOs of our multi-academy trust, the Polaris Trust in Calderdale, and it's a very inclusive partnership board. So it has family voice Calderdale, so we've got parental voice working on that group. We have public health staff, representatives from C&K Careers from early years to make sure we're getting downstream, and community safety colleagues as well. And they are really looking at sharing good practice and identifying, particularly from the schools in Calderdale who are very good at inclusive practice, being able to share the good practice that is in place, but also understanding and trying to get underneath some of the issues that are causing the exclusions in the first place. And I think it's really good that we've got the emotional health and wellbeing report and the deep dive that you've been doing as Children's Scrutiny later on this evening, so we can join the dots on that. We have increased the places at the Whitley Academy pupil referral unit, and as Councillor Wilkinson said, we do have an application in at the moment with the Department for Education for a free school, a free alternative provision school, which would significantly increase our provision within the borough. But notwithstanding that, Paul Tinsley is working with all schools around their inclusive practice, but also whether we can encourage inclusive alternative provision within mainstream settings, so that we don't have to rely on the Whitley in the way that we do at the moment. The report sets out quite a lot of detail around individual schools. We thought this was important that we shared this with you and you could see what the numbers were. So I'm going to stop there, Chair, so we can get into the discussion and any questions that Scrutiny may have for us this evening.
Thank you, Julie. I'm sure there'll be quite a few questions. So could I open the floor, please? Councillor Durrant.
Thank you, Chair. I will put in that I've got some declarations. I'm on Family Voice. I'm a school governor. I'm also on the MHST group and a volunteer with NAS. And I was the person that was chosen to undertake this review with obviously everybody else who was involved. First of all, I want to thank everybody, because on top of being able to do a real deep dive into the work, it's clear that there's already been a proactive response in setting up the board, looking at it prior to us doing kind of the detailed work that we're doing now. I do have a couple of questions, but I wanted to just give a couple of thoughts, if that's okay. So first of all, I think it's really key that everybody's just thanked for being honest and open, including the schools. It's a really difficult time, and even though we know that some schools are actively more inclusive than others, I think what's clear is the majority of schools are actively wanting to be more inclusive and engaging and learn. Both of my children have sadly experienced exclusions, and the impact of that on a family is great, particularly because of the SEND need. And I know that everybody feels that, no matter who it is, whether it's the school that's excluding, the local authority. Myself and Councillor Prashad, the chair of this group, had a really interesting meeting with with a few young people from one of our settings who had sadly experienced exclusion themselves and shared similar views, really. But that kind of brings me on to some of the questions I've got. So the report was great, so thank you for everybody who's taken time to put that information in there. I wanted to ask, so I hope this is okay. There's no reference, particularly in the SEND quota, of the children who have SEND needs. That's broken down within primary, but we don't see that in secondary. Within the whole report, we don't have any reference to how many of those children are looked after. So that there's kind of a missing link there. And the huge impact and change has been around persistent disruptive behaviour. I'd like to know what that looks like. What does that mean? I think what was really timely and sensible for us is that when we was able to speak to some of the young people, what they shared around their reasons for exclusions themselves, they were worlds apart. In some regards, there were young people who had been part of some quite serious issues, and on the other hand, a young man got excluded because he went to school with the wrong colour socks on. So the disparity is quite large, and Councillor Wilkinson's reference around the cost of living impact, I think, is an important one. If we're excluding young people for inappropriate uniform or not having the right equipment and things, when that could be addressed. Now, you know, looking at the report, it's huge that persistent disruptive behaviour seems to be the one that's kind of gone a little bit haywire in the numbers. I also wanted to ask, and I know I'm asking a lot of questions, I don't expect that we might have the answers now, but a lot of the young people with an EHCP particular, and I can see the pattern because often in a few cases they were moved into more suitable settings, and of course, as Councillor Wilkinson said earlier, you know, we have addressed that there is a need for more appropriate settings, particularly around social, emotional, and mental health places. But I wondered if we have any of the information around the young people who were being excluded for EHCPs. Do we have the information if that triggered an interim review to ensure that the school were able to meet their needs in the best way possible? How long since the previous Ed Psych? And if that's not triggered and then they've had a secondary, why is it not triggered an interim review? Because there's clearly something that's amiss there. And the only other one was, if we have the information, do we know, following exclusions or suspensions or threats of permanent exclusion, how many of those have been linked to young people whose parents have then chosen to do elective home education? Do we have any of that information? I don't know if we do, but I just thought I'd ask. Sorry, Chair, I know that was like a question dump, but there you go.
Thank you, Councillor Drance. Julie, would you like to come back on that?
Can I just ask Parveen whether Parveen could just comment on the data? As you say, there is some in there regarding EHE and SEND, but in the different cohorts, and just to comment on whether we could pull easily the looked after cohort within all of this. Parveen, can you comment on that? Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Julie. Councillors, quite a few questions, so I'll try and do my best to answer some of them. We won't have the data to hand for all of them. The one that I will start off with is, as virtual school head, I can inform the board of the suspensions for CLAR have reduced for 22-23 on previous years, and there were no permanent children looked after in the year 22-23. So that is quite an easy one, because as virtual school head, obviously I monitor that very, very closely. With regards to elective home education, we do have a number of families when at the point of a permanent exclusion, our duty is to arrange the 6-day provision, which we do at the Whitley AP. We do have families who refuse that provision, and as a parent, you know, that is within their right, and they can apply for an in-year transfer at another school. Families do make the decision. We do have the, and I don't have the numbers with me, but we can look into of the families that did refuse that provision at the Whitley AP, how many proceeded to electively home educate as an alternative. So that is something that we do track, and I can get the figures for that for 22-23. With regards to sending EHCP, I can robustly say when a child with an EHCP is at risk of an exclusion and the local authority exclusion officer is notified, one of the key, he has a checklist that he will go through, and an interim review for those children is quite on top of that checklist. And at times we will hold an interim review quite closely. We might have one of them, we might have another one, and quite close to the previous one, to try and avoid that exclusion where the SEN team or the SEN officer for that child or that school will become involved. In addition to that, we also have in Di Drury's team in the early help pathway, we have 2 dedicated posts that we have promoted in the last 6 months at school cluster meetings. So our exclusion officer has attended those cluster meetings, informing heads of the resource that is available to support schools to be able to enact early help pathways for those families where children are displaying behaviours that could potentially result in an exclusion.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just
Yeah, can I just come back in? Is the interim review situation changed? Because that's not been my personal experience as a parent. I've had, my eldest child has sadly had many exclusions, and it's never triggered a review. And I'm not sure if that has been changed since the changing of the increase in numbers. What it did trigger is early help, which I agree for us as a family, I would absolutely advocate to any parent to take that on board. It was a fantastic intervention and support, but we didn't get offered an interim review. And actually, as I said, that was on numerous exclusions and suspensions, sadly.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. With apologies from me, I'm not the service manager for SEN. My exclusion officer does always request that, advise that to the school, to the SENCO, to request one from the SEN team. So that's one of the key things. When he takes that call or receives that communication, he will say to them, you know, this child has an EHCP. Have you liaised with the SEN officer? Have you considered an EHCP review? Could you request an interim review? So whether it happened or not, you know, between the school and the SEN team, counsellors, I wouldn't be able to comment, but our exclusion officer will have, like you say, the early help. He will go through a number of things to advise the school on to do, you know, to try and avoid that exclusion for that child wherever possible.
The only other question I'd like to add is, do we have the figures for how many exclusions have been challenged and overturned? I wonder how often that the parents are aware that can happen, because I know it does happen. I've been a governor and had to sit on exclusion boards, but I just wondered if that would be worth looking at, because again, that would look at the schools who potentially are excluding prior to following policies and things, because that's usually the reason why they're overturned, isn't it?
Yes, we do have the figures for that, and I can count on one hand the number of exclusions that are overturned at the governing body panel meeting. I do need to add, our exclusion officer is not expected, or we have no right to say to an academy, to a secondary school academy or a primary academy, that we are attending the governing body panel meeting. It is at the parents' request that we can attend. Our exclusion officer does attend. I am part of a regional exclusions group across Yorkshire and Humber, and our exclusion officer attends more governing body panel meeting for exclusions, even though the majority of our high schools are academies, then some of our counterparts do. But it is at the parents' request. So that what we do is equip the parent, guide and advise the parent to ask the necessary questions of the governing body panel. And then if the parent chooses to not accept that decision of the governing body panel and wants to proceed to an independent review panel, again, our exclusion officer will support the parent in progressing with that.
Thank you, Parveen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We've got quite a lot of questions here, so I'm going first to Sheila, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought it was a very interesting report. There's lots and lots of details in there, and details of facts and figures of reasons why there are exclusions and suspensions. And, you know, we know from some of the commentary that it is a sort of a difficult subject to tackle, really. And, you know, I think great efforts have made to get to the bottom of why these, you know, are happening and what we can do to help schools and parents and children to improve the situation. However, I don't want to comment about some of that. What I want to comment about is I was left feeling very, very uncomfortable and concerned with the tables that actually name schools. And so my first question is, why was that information included? And Councillor Wilkinson sort of commented that, you know, this report has generated some local media interest, and I can understand why when schools are named. It's sort of, you know, and within the report itself, some schools are praised for having fewer exclusions, whilst others aren't. And I just wondered, you know, why the names of the schools were included, what was the purpose intended for that, and sort of why, I'm just trying to read my own scribbled notes here, sorry, and what was the intention, what was the hope of that to achieve? Because my concern is if schools are identified, there's a possibility that children could be identified within the local area and everything. And you know, and I just think as well, you know, about the relationships we have, and if you like, the duty of care we have for our, you know, for our schools, for the staff and the children in there, and the impact that that will have on certain local communities. So as I say that, you know, I think that naming them will be very unhelpful in the future. And, you know, so I just wanted to raise that really. Because of my concern about it.
Can I come in on that?
Sheila.
Can I come in on that,
certainly,
please, Chair?
Certainly.
I just want to assure Sheila that this is something that we talked through and considered at length. And this is a scrutiny panel, which is really trying to understand the picture in detail. And we didn't think it would be helpful to give aggregated figures across primary and secondary when the scrutiny board really wants to get underneath the skin of what is happening in schools. And we were also very clear, Sheila, that there was no way did we want to blame any school for any of the decisions they make. You know, it's not an easy decision to make to exclude or suspend a child. And we know that on time schools have absolutely run out of all options. And we wanted to make sure that scrutiny were completely informed. And we knew that this would be of interest, obviously, you know, to all of the head teachers. And we did speak to the Calderdale secondary heads group and the Calderdale Primary Heads Association, and to tell them what we were intending on doing. But we didn't think it was going to be helpful, particularly for Scrutiny Board members to come with an aggregated report, particularly with a significant rise. I think what it does do, it does raise questions around, the best practice that's going on in some schools, and the sharing and the learning that is happening at the board, and also raises questions about others. I think things are pretty obvious sometimes in the public domain, aren't they, through Ofsted inspections? And we do appreciate the sensitivity as well, with judgments and identification of certain schools with communities, but we wanted to be as open and transparent and honest, and we haven't done it without discussing it when telling the schools what our intention would be. But we thought it was such an important topic that we really fully understood what was happening in Calderdale schools as a whole, and in some detail. And you're absolutely right about individual children. That we would not want. We have anonymised, as some of the factors in this. We wouldn't want any child to be identified through this report. But I understand completely, Sheila, with what you're saying, and it isn't anything that we've done lightly. We have really considered, what we are sharing with Scrutiny and why, but we didn't think it was helpful with the rise to bring a completely aggregated report that wouldn't tell the individual pictures of what's going on.
If I could just come back, I can understand that, but to me, saying school A, school B would have been able to allow that information to come through. And I still feel uncomfortable about schools, but, I just hope there's no comeback, really. Thank you.
Could I just briefly come back on that as well, Chair?
Yes, carry on.
I mean, for me, I think it was important to know that there are some quite big disparities between schools in terms of the figures. And I think if we are going to tackle the problem, I think we need to understand why that is. And I think to hide the figures behind school A, school B would not really be helpful in that regard, because when we're talking about things such as cost of living crisis, for example, impacting the numbers, I think it's important to know, which schools are we talking about, what's their catchment area, what sort of communities is it that they serve, if we are to consider whether things like the cost of living crisis are actually having an impact. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, can we move on? Councillor Atkinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just I'll be as quick as I can. A couple of quick points. Mine's around the categories. I personally, I prefer to have 100 categories and have single figures in each, and you get a better understanding where persistent disruption, that could be 1,001 things. So I don't know. It's the council or the schools that decide what categories they are. The second one's around weapons, and on the face of it, it looks the numbers look to be good, but people will probably be out on the board. We're looking at a knife crime review at the moment. I know there was a number of concerned people on the people that have interviewed and given evidence around schools not reporting properly or reporting under a different category when weapons are found. I don't know if there's any truth behind this or anybody knows. Is anybody aware of any situation where schools have not reported the under the right category or not reporting at all? Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, would you like me to come in? Chair, would you like?
Yeah, thank you.
To come in to answer Councillor Atkinson's question. Okay, so the 15 categories, Councillor Atkinson, are actually DFE, the Department for Education categories. So nationally, regionally, locally, they are all the categories that all schools use. So it's difficult to break that down. I do understand the point you're making, but these are the categories that the schools are required to use. And as you say, a number of incidents could fall within that persistent disruptive behaviour category, and it has got the highest number of incidents recorded. So I hope that answers that part of the question. And with regards to the incorrect usage of categories, it's something that when a permanent exclusion notification comes through to the local authority, it's a formal notification. It's something that the exclusion officer will double check with the school. So we are very clear, because when we are arranging the 6-day provision for that child, we need to understand, and the Whitley AP who are going to be receiving that child also need to understand the actual reason behind the exclusion and the actual incident. So there isn't anywhere to misinform that notification, if that makes sense, because the receiving alternative provision needs that information as well as ourselves as a local authority. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Pauline. We move on to Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, I just wanted to say how sad I am to see how bad the figures are, really. I mean, the amount of education that is being lost through these suspensions must be huge. And, you know, there are some categories that are really worrying in the amount, I mean, not least the persistent disruption, which could be all sorts of things. So I think, although I understand it's a government category, it would be really useful to break that down a little bit more if it's possible to do so. You know, sort of what, you know, whether it's just you know, a teacher taking a particular dislike to a student who is consistently irritating within a classroom, or whether there's any exploration gone into sort of why is that student particularly disruptive during a lesson. Is there something going on at home that's causing that?
Chair, sorry to interrupt. I put my hand up quite late, but I can offer a bit of insight into the persistent disruptive behaviour because I currently work in a secondary school. If you look at just most behaviour policies, persistent disruptive behaviour will be on there as in so many exclusions within a certain amount of time. So it'll be so many days generally within a fixed amount of time, and those days could be for various different reasons. But it's generally, and most behaviour policies, which are on school websites, will generally tell you what their triggers are for that. So just because a few people were asking about persistent, that just gives people a bit of an insight as to what that generally means.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, so I've lost my train now. Yes, other than looking at persistent disruption, which is clearly extremely worrying from the numbers. There are others that are particularly high, and things like verbal abuse and threatening behaviour to an adult. It would, I think, what is so concerning is that the lack of we've got the numbers. We know how many students in total this is affecting. It'd be really useful to have sort of, you know, how many students have been excluded once, how many, you know, sort of once or twice or 5 times, 10 times, and so on, so that we get a bit of a picture of, you know, of clearly there's 1,600 students and nearly 5,000 exclusions. So there's quite a lot of multiples in there. It would be very interesting to know whether there's a number of students that have been just excluded once and that's done the job and they've never blotted their copybook again, so to speak, or whether there's sort of, you know, how many students have got a persistent time and time again being excluded. And so that would be really interesting information to have alongside this, I think. And yeah, sort of, but it just paints a really grim picture as to sort of it's the why that bothers me. Why are so many kids getting into a position where they are breaking the rules to such an extent that they're being suspended from school? And are schools suspending for ridiculous things like wearing the wrong colour socks? Because quite frankly, that is ludicrous, and it should be prevented. It doesn't do kids' education any good at all. I mean, as my daughter was one for wearing knee-length stripy multicoloured socks to primary school, which got into bother on more than one occasion. But as she pointed out, what difference do the colour of my socks actually make to the amount of information I'm learning? It doesn't. So, you know, she got hand slapped for it, but not figuratively, rather. But, you know, to suspend a kid for something like that, it's, you know, it seems the wrong use of an implement that should be used for more serious transgressions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Anybody want to come back on that, or are we satisfied? Councillor Foster, yeah. Okay, Councillor Monty.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure that at some point we are going to get the breakdown of the information in the secondary exclusion sector about the number of children who have special educational needs or education and healthcare plans. That's just a comment, but if people can note that, because we do need that information with regard to secondary schools, because it isn't there in this document. But oh, sorry, I should have declared a couple of interests. I'm one of the Board of Governors of Highbury Special School in Calderdale, and I'm also on the Schools Forum for Calderdale. And I've mentioned this part and asked this question at both of those venues, and I'm asking it again now. I know that Calderdale takes a great pride in the number of children who are attending mainstream schools, secondary or primary, who have an educational and health care plan, or indeed have significant special needs. And my concern is, and the comment I have made and the question I'm kind of asking is, these exclusion figures, which highlight how many of those young people have special educational needs and education and healthcare plans, are they being excluded because they are inappropriately placed? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mounty.
It's not a problem to get the figures. Parveen said that we will be able to provide those. I think it's difficult to comment on your question, Councillor Monteith, because you're getting into individual specifics for, for different children in terms of their provision. And we did have a long discussion last time, didn't we, when we had Chris Lingard here from Ravenscliffe talking about the need for more secondary school places, and Children's Scrutiny are where we are working on this and getting an options paper ready to take to Cabinet about expanding secondary school places. I don't think it's a bad thing to be proud of mainstream schools being inclusive. Some parents really want their children in mainstream education and don't want them in special provision, but we do need to make sure on the borough that we do have enough specialist provision when it is required. So we will get the figures for you on the secondary school and the SEM figures. That's not a problem.
Thank you. Can we move on to Caroline, please, now? I'm sorry you've had to wait, Caroline.
No, it's fine. Hello, thank you, Chair. I think I'll declare my interest. I'm a school governor, one of the primary schools. I suppose, like all the other members have said, the figures are quite worrying to see. And I had a question. I just was wondering why someone has said that on the report that the high levels of disruption occurs mostly in term 2. So I was wondering what is the reason to that. And I was also just wondering, are there other remedial actions the schools have tried before exclusion? And have we tried to look at the schools that have higher figures as compared to others and just looked at the reasons to that? And it's been mentioned that probably COVID and the cost of living has probably been one of the issues. Are there other outlying or causative factors? Maybe are the schools getting enough support? Have they asked for that? So that some of the questions have already been asked. So there's no point. I've written them down here. There's no point to go through them.
Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you.
Somebody like to answer that one, please?
Caroline, please, would you repeat the first part of your question? You are, and sorry, my Wi-Fi connection missed the very first bit of your question.
Yeah, it was on the report. He was saying that the high level of exclusions occur mostly in term 2, and some of them have. Let me see, got it here. So as opposed to term 1, so most of the high suspension rates
In
are in
term
term
2.
2. Yeah, so just wondering what's causing the discrepancy.
It's quite difficult to comment on individual schools, but what we were outlining here, that what we see, the patterns that we're seeing is during the spring term, that's when we do see a higher number of children being suspended. And one example could be that I'll provide is the year 11 GCSE prep exams. You know, when the pressure of the GCSE preparation is starting, children struggling. And I think as Councillor Wilkinson outlined at the opening of this report, children and their emotional and mental health and their coping mechanism when there is pressure does sometimes result in those behaviours that go against the school's behaviour policy. So we do think that's a trend, and it was for 2 particular schools where we did see that particular, and that's just one example of where we do see an increase in that spring term of suspensions.
Thank you, Carrie. Councillor Tremaine.
Thank you, Chair. Just a really quick comment, really, just because obviously it does link in a little bit with the review that we're going to come up to later on. And I suppose just from some of our visits into schools, I think it's sort of made us very aware of the kind of the process of taking those decisions from a head, and the kind of challenge it is for them, and how reluctant, certainly with primary heads that we've spoken to, how absolutely reluctant they were to take those decisions. And I suppose it's just really important. It's very easy to get kind of focused on the figures, isn't it, and to see them as numbers. And I think people have already said that they are children, aren't they? And it's absolutely crucial that we kind of think about the impact it has on the child, but also on the wider school and the staff within the school as well, and how hugely difficult it is to make those decisions. So I think it's really important that we're looking into this and trying to work out any ways that we can support staff to support their children and young people to the best way possible, so that we can kind of really reduce these figures. But the impact of some of the kind of factors that Councillor Wilkinson spoke about at the start, I think has come through very clearly in the conversations that we've had with heads and with young people too. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Councillor. Mike, you've had your hand up for quite some time. I'm sorry for the wait. Mike?
I don't think I have, Chair.
Oh, right. I've got a hand up on your name. Mandeep, was it you who had your hand up?
It's Councillor Vetch who's got his hand up, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Beach?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Beach. Right, just a couple of things. So in terms of interests, I'm teaching out of the area now in secondary school. But I have taught for 20 years in different primary schools across Calderdale. Just to go back to your PDB, just to maybe shed a bit of light on it, those who don't teach, it could be literally anything that is stopping the teaching and learning happening in the classroom. Obviously, the teacher's job is to, maximise the potential of every single child. So if somebody is shouting out loud or throwing something, anything that is stopping teaching and learning and disrupting, however low level, that will start a series of sort of consequences, and then the whole thing can escalate. But clearly, in my 20 years, I've never heard anybody being excluded for the coloured socks or because a teacher doesn't like them, and that would not happen. I'm not in any of the schools I've taught at over the years. but I've got a couple of questions. So the first question is, looking at the report, the primary school exclusions have a column for current status of education, but I couldn't see that for the secondary school children. So that was one question. Have we got the current education status for secondary schools? And also on the primary table, it's got an example of the reason for exclusion. It says got exactly one example for every school. Does that mean one child from each school has been exactly one child from each school, which sounds a bit unlikely? I thought it might be a school, maybe two, not one. And another question is, what are the options for, say, secondary, because I teach secondary, what are the options for a child who goes through the system and gets excluded? Is the TWAPA the only option? Because where I teach in Oldham, we do manage moves. So I'm thinking of a year 9 pupil that I teach who came to us from a fee-paying grammar school because he'd done something really serious, like set fire to part of it or something, is kind of not fitted in and been excluded a heck of a lot where we are now. And then he had a managed move to another school. And on that managed move, he was still on our roll, but he was on a managed move to another secondary school. That has broken down because of his poor behaviour at that other school. So he's back with us again. I taught him the other day. But are there any other options apart from the alternative provision, or doing Calderdale do this sort of managed move thing, which I think is quite a good idea? So if you're the mother or father of a child that gets permanently excluded, you know, have they got any other choice to try and get in another school rather than the TWAPA, the alternative provision? I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Councillor Beach. Harvey?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Beach. Just on the first point, with regards to the primary breakdown in terms of the destination, we do track the, it was a lot easier to present the data for the primary because we were talking smaller numbers, but I just want to reassure you that we track every single child who is excluded and whose family make the decision not to engage with or not to accept the provision of the placement at the Whitley AP. So if the family do make that decision, they have, so if they make the choice to electively home educate, education welfare service, again, sits within my portfolio. So we've got those synergies in place and we've got those processes in place where the elective home educated officers will pick up that child and support that family. Where the family decide to request an in-year transfer, again, the education welfare service and the exclusion officer will support that family along with the early help pathway team. So those mechanisms are in place. I track every single child that has refused because we have a statutory responsibility to make sure that all excluded children, we've arranged provision. If the family have refused that provision, what is their destination? So we track that quite closely to reassure you. The data for the secondary in terms of the destination, I don't have it. It's not presented in the format, but we do know the ones that are out of education and what education welfare are doing with that family. With regards to managed moves, Calderdale, our schools are quite strong. And I'm just going to pick up on the point that Councillor Tremaine made as well. Schools work really, really hard, and no head teacher comes into school any morning of the week to make that decision that they're going to exclude a child. And managed moves is something that we've always been quite strong in Calderdale between schools, and the local authority officers will support that conversation with the parents as well. So we will attend those meetings to facilitate that conversation with the parent to support the school, and that does happen. When we do a deep dive, and we did one very recently through the multi-agency partnership group, when we did the deep dive on that, a lot of the children that had been permanently excluded had actually had up to 3 to 4 managed booths prior to their permanent exclusion. So I hope that answers that point for you. And your final point was, I think, around the Whitley AP. Currently, that is our only commissioned alternative provision for 6-day provision. However, we are, as Councillor Wilkinson outlined, we do have an AP, a DFE bidding for a further alternative provision, and we are also exploring alternatives to a 6-day provision. So we have a couple of conversations that are in the diaries with 2 particular high schools where we're looking at an alternative provision centre. So as an alternative to an exclusion, is there something that we can do collectively? And I think that's the key word for us as officers, is collaborative and collective. The reason being, schools are struggling, as Councillor Tremaine has outlined, with the, with the behaviours and the challenges that, that some children are and young people are facing due to their emotional and mental health. And what the last thing we need to be doing is proportioning blame. We need to come together to find solutions. And I'm going to give an example of something that we've introduced. So across the partnership, and this is, I'm talking wider than education now, I'm talking about the partnership through the Violent Crime and Safer Street steering group that I sit on. And the Violence Reduction Unit has allocated some funding to us to address some of these issues that we're discussing this evening. So we have a group, a provider called Project Communities that is working in 4 of our high schools, and it's very short term. We only started after October half term, but they're working with individual children at 4 of our high schools, and we looked at the data over the last 2 or 3 years to inform that decision which 4 high schools they would be working with. But that's one example of what we're doing collaboratively with schools and with wider partners to address the issue, because the local authority, I think, as the director outlined, our statutory duty is to arrange 6-day provision. But we all know we're child-centred. It's more than that. It's bigger than that. These are children of Calderdale, and we have to do our utmost to. We might not resolve the issues that outlined, but we have to find ways of keeping them engaged with education. So I just wanted to kind of bring that point in as an officer, which I think is quite important for scrutiny. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Parveen.
Nice to go back. Yeah, I agree, Parveen. Thank you for that answer. My question, that's brilliant, but there was a question, the primary school exclusions, was it just one from each primary school? Was I right in reading that report correctly? Does that Can you hear me?
I can. Apologies. I would need to look back. Can I look back into that?
Yeah.
And reply to you. Yeah, and reply to you.
Of course.
I've got about 4 reports open.
Yeah, sorry. And of course, the bit about you've got the information for the current education of the secondary school pupils. I noticed that Brooksbank is in Elland, which is my ward, and that's got the highest. So it would be interesting. I'll be going into Brooksbank shortly, but speak to sort of head and stuff. But it would be interesting to know what's happened to those, where they are, their current status. But thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Councillor Veitch. Adil, I'm sorry you've had to wait. You're on the Youth Council. What's your question?
Can I just say, as a young person, it is sad to see stuff like this, because you see how sometimes it can be necessary, but it's regardless of whether it is or isn't, you can see the impact it has on everyone, including young people and the people making that decision. But you talked about some of the new measures in place. Can I just ask, do you know the effectiveness of these, or if not yet, when it comes around to the next time a piece of evidence is released like this, would it be possible to actually have that included within the report, just to see how effective the strategies are and how they actually are impacting young people?
Thank you.
Chair, would you like me to reply to Adil?
Yes, please.
Adele, that's a really good point, and one that I ask quite regularly. So the example I was giving, the project communities work that is happening in 4 of the schools, we because it's funded through the violence reduction unit, they obviously expect an impact report in terms of how it's going, and we've done a midterm one. So we did one last week, and 2 of the high schools have found that program really, really positive. 2 out of the 4. It's a bit early to identify whether, because my key question was, have suspensions reduced in those 4 high schools as a result of this intervention? So that's something that we will be measuring, and something that I'm happy, I'm sure that the director will agree to be sharing to see what the outcome is. And we have a number of these initiatives that we are putting in place in schools to try and see what is it. I don't think one particular program is going to make a difference. It's that wider approach, and see what had the biggest impact in terms of reducing suspensions and reducing exclusions, and we'll be happy to share that in future reports.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pavi. I have some comments and some questions. With regard to the exclusions group, am I right in assuming that parents are invited to attend these meetings?
So following the exclusion notification from the school to the parent chair, yes, the schools have a duty to invite the parents to the governing body panel meeting.
Okay, thank you. And what are the timescales, and when will the conclusions be made public on this, please?
Sorry, the conclusions to which point, sorry?
On the exclusions group, what are the timescales, and when will the results be made public?
It's an ongoing piece of work, Councillor Prashad. It's had its 4th meeting, and it's really getting stuck into the detail. It's an ongoing piece of work with the partnership that's involved. It may be helpful the next time that you want to have a look at the exclusion issue at Scrutiny, that we do an update report to yourselves, but it's just it is an ongoing piece of work. It's a long-term piece of work that we're committed to.
Okay, thank you. I suppose my comments are, I'm surprised at the number of primary school suspensions and assaults on the staff. And also worried about the number of permanent exclusions at Brooksbank and Park Lane. And do we know why there are more exclusions at these schools?
I think it would be very unfair and very difficult, to go through those individual situations on a scrutiny panel meeting. What we do, what I can say is the dialogue with those schools is quite strong, and I think I did outline in the report that reasons for exclusions. One example was an Ofsted inspection. So an Ofsted inspection might identify that the behaviour policy adopted by the school is contributing to less effective attainment and progress outcomes, and that behaviour needs to be dealt with differently. And that could be a reason, for post an Ofsted inspection, that we might see an increase in exclusions from a particular school. So I'm just generally saying, some of the reasons that we might see some high schools excluding. So I think it'd be fair to say there's a plethora of reasons why those 2 particular schools have a high number of exclusion, or why we've seen a high number of exclusions. The strong partnership working, I think, as Councillor Wilkinson outlined, you know, with all our high schools, we do have the conversations around the table. You know, the Assistant Director for Education and Inclusion, attends their conference, their monthly Calderdale Association of Head meeting. So the dialogue is open, and those questions are being asked. What else can we do to reduce these number of exclusions and suspensions from particular high schools?
Okay, thank you. Do the multi-agency partnerships have any thoughts on the increase in exclusions?
I don't know whether Councillor Wilkinson wants to comment on that, whether the partnership has drawn any conclusions. Councillor Wilkinson, on some of the reasons for exclusions. I know you are looking at some case studies, but
I mean, the partnership board, the Inclusion Partnership Board, is that the work that we're doing? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, as Julie says, it is really ongoing, but, you know, some of the issues that I sort of mentioned at the start of the meeting around, you know, increased mental health issues as a result of cost of living, the pandemic are sort of some of the things that we have sort of explored. And as I mentioned as well, that sort of connected issue around provision for special educational needs and emotional health support is, you know, some of the big issues that we're having to get stuck into. But again, I think, you know, coming back to that issue about the publication of the different schools and the different data, I think it is interesting that there is some quite big differences, as you mentioned, Councillor Pritchard, in the numbers in different schools. So it's trying to understand the best practice that we have in certain schools where they have low numbers of exclusions, I think, is an important part of this work as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Issett.
I just think on the back of the comparing numbers and the school content, you have to understand the context of the school. Anybody who read the Brooksbank Ofsted report will understand the context of the school and the difficulties being faced. If you were to look at Park Lane, a school that's been consistently underpanned for many years, which therefore has an impact on the students and the intake. So I just think it's unfair sometimes to say we need to look at the best practice of schools with low numbers, because it's like comparing apples with oranges. It's completely different. And some declaring that I work in a secondary school currently, nobody wants to exclude or suspend a child, but you have a duty of care to all the other children in your school as well. And you have to balance that. And you have to be able to run a functioning site where students comply to the expectations. And when that isn't the case, there has to be somewhere for you to go. So it's just, you have to understand the narrative around it. And if you've read the Ofsted report of some schools and you looked at the historical figures of them, you would see why they were different. You wouldn't then just say, oh, they have lots of exclusions, so they don't show good practice. Because actually, sometimes they show better practice because they have more experience of it.
Can I just quickly come back? I completely agree with that, and I've tried to be a bit careful about getting into details of individual schools, but I think you are right, particularly in the case of Brooksbank and Park Lane. I think Park Lane, because of the lower admission numbers, I think when a child has looked to go back into mainstream education, it'll be that school that is often the option. So they'll be taking children that have been excluded previously from other schools. So it's not then a surprise that they've also then got high numbers of exclusions themselves. But I do think, you know, when I talk about best practice, I think I'd also like to acknowledge that there are some, I think of one primary school in particular, for example, that is in probably our most deprived area in the entire borough, with really challenging you know, families that are facing real challenges, and they haven't excluded anybody in like years and years and years. So I think there are certain schools that are clearly doing something right that I think it is important to be able to sort of look at and learn from, whilst acknowledging that, yes, there are big differences in circumstances between schools, and often there is a reason why there is particularly high numbers at certain schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, if there are no other questions, I'm pretty sure that this subject will be brought back again probably next year when we get the new figures. So can we now move on to item 7? Children Looked After Annual Report 2022 to 23. And can I invite the locality service manager to run through the report, please?
Hello. Hi. Thank you, Councillor Prashad. I apologise that the service manager David Chambers could not be here this evening. He got another appointment, so I'm going to just introduce the report, which hopefully all members of Scrutiny have had an opportunity to look at. And just to say that this report was also presented to our corporate parenting panel last week, so chaired by Councillor Wilkinson, and had some full discussion there. So some members who were at corporate parenting will have also been present for that discussion. I'm just going to give a sort of brief introduction. Really, there's a lot of detail in this report, so I'm not going to try and cover obviously all aspects, but happy then to take any questions. Obviously, our children looked after services, our social workers working with our children looked after. It's a very regulated, highly regulated area, as you would expect. And the beginning of this report just refers to some of that regulation and some of the principles around corporate parenting in terms of how we're looking after our young people. I think we're proud in Calderdale that we have a strong vision for our children looked after and how we're wanting the best and for them to achieve in life. It all fits with our Calderdale vision. And we've got obviously now recently renewed promise to our children in care and our care leavers in terms of those principles, following the work that we've done with our young people in care and our young people in the care leaver service, of what they want from us as corporate parents in terms of advancing their opportunities, their health, their education, their housing lives and so on. So I think we've got a lot of strengths in the service to offer. We've done a lot of work, as we know, on our corporate parenting arrangements following the Local Government Association review, the LGA review we had back in around October 2022. And we've really, strengthened, I think, the work we do now in our corporate parenting panel in this place, the Corporate Parenting Board. It's now thematic. It has lots of discussion, input from young people, questions from young people, and input as part of those regular discussions which look at health, education, housing, and voice and influence. What I'd say in terms of our cohort of our young people in care, it's fairly stable over time, and it's fairly on a level, if you like, with other neighbouring authorities. We're not an outlier in any respect. In March 23, when this report, the figures in this report mostly relate to 22, 23 and take figures from March 23, we had 340 young people looked after in Calderdale, and 16 unaccompanied asylum seekers. So that gave us a total of about 356. Just to compare our figures for January, just to let you know, the current figure, it's 334 children looked after. So it's actually slightly less, 76 children, but it's slightly less today than it was in March, or at the 1st of January than it was in March. However, we've got almost double the number of unaccompanied asylum seekers. We've got 30 unaccompanied asylum seekers now. So our total cohort today stands at 364. And we are seeing a kind of steady, incremental, slow, steady little rise in our numbers of children looked after. That is similar to a national trend. It's similar to our regional statistical neighbours. We're not different in any respect. What we are seeing is that significant rise in unaccompanied asylum seeker children. It's not our own Calderdale children. We've got more of them coming into care because we haven't. Our numbers are remaining very steady. But we only had 4 unaccompanied asylum seekers in 2021. We had 10 in 2022. And as of today, we've got 30. So obviously that's in relation to our national policies. But I think it's just important to make people aware, because they might see those slightly rising numbers of children looked after and say, what's that about? And we've obviously just been talking about, you know, the general pressures on families, you know, the COVID impact. We know that, you know, emotional well-being of children, we're going to talk about a bit more later. So we would expect to see some impact there in terms of children that we're working with. But what we do in Calderdale is we really hold steady and try and do a lot of preventive work to keep children out of care. And we have a lot of support work so that we only bring children, you know, into our care and permanently into our care. We really need to be there. Our younger children, obviously, we work very hard to get them adopted if possible, or on permanent arrangements through special guardianship. We've had an increase in special guardianship over 22-23, and we've had a little bit more resource go into our small special guardianship team that sits in our fostering service. So that's been good news. The other just good news I wanted to highlight is the work we're doing around to recruit more foster carers. On our sufficiency side, we know that's a challenge nationally, and Calderdale is no different. However, I think we've done some really good work in that space in the last couple of years. And in 2022-23, which we're looking at, we successfully got the council tax exemption supported by the council members. And that's really had an impact. We can see in renewed interest in people coming forward with an interest to become foster carers. Obviously, it takes a long time from that register and interest to go through a full assessment to get approved. But we have had more foster carers come in to be assessed. We've got 4 currently in assessment at the moment. We've recently approved several families to become mainstream foster carers. I think that compares to a couple of years ago when we had, you know, very, very few, you know, maybe 1 or 2 in the whole year. But we're seeing a steady flow now of more people with an interest in fostering. So it's good. We've got a good, strong offer there. And that council tax exemption in a time of, you know, squeeze on budgets and, you know, general pressures for families is really helping. Is there more we want to do? There's always more we want to do. We look at our children who we have to place in external placements. And interestingly, again, the figures in terms of that, the numbers of children in external residential placements since this report was compiled and this data have actually reduced. So this report you'll see when it talks about where children are placed, and it gives you some indications of the kind of placements that children in Calderdale have and the different types of placements. That's on page 28. It talks about 41 children in external residential. This was as of March, 31st of March 23. Just to let you know, we obviously give this a lot of scrutiny. We're looking at these figures all the time. And the recent figure we have for early January was that we had 31 children in external placement. So it's a reduction of 10, which is good news, because what we're trying to do is give a lot of scrutiny around that. We have regular external placement meetings and placement planning meetings, and I have a review of all our external placements every week with our managers. So we give a whole lot of scrutiny to that. However, what we've seen is escalating costs in those placements. Some of that is related to children and their complexity. For the things we've just been talking about, we're seeing, you know, some of our young people with their layers of trauma that they're dealing with, who are looked after. Some of our older children are quite complex. So we're really struggling to meet their needs locally. We can't meet them in our foster placements, and we're struggling in our own internal provision, although we do have some very complex children now in our internal placements, our own children's homes that we're managing and managing well, but we can't manage them all. So some of those children do go outside, and the cost of those placements is a national issue, and we know representations have been made to government about this. Those private providers have been increasing their costs, you know, multiply really over the last year or two. So those costs of placements per unit are going up and up and up and up. Not that we're putting more children in external residential, because we're not. We've actually got less. So I probably just pause there, because there's probably a lot more that I could say, and there is a lot of detail in the report. I think overall we are doing well. I think we've got a stable workforce of social workers. We've got some really good social workers working with a, you know, systemic model built on relationships, and we've got some very experienced staff. We've got less agency workers than we've had than we had previously, more permanent staff. So I think there's lots of positives for us to build on and work on. And we have got, as I say, a strong corporate parenting arrangements. We're trying to do more that we can to include the voice of young people in the work that we do and their influence in service developments. We never sit on our laurels and think everything is perfect, because it never is. But I think, overall it's a sort of good picture. And, we're working on the areas, particularly around, placements of children, trying to reduce the number of placement disruptions for children, ensuring children get good placement stability, and that we've got sufficient, foster carers, because we want, if children can't be living with their own families, we want children in foster care. And we're doing lots of work on connected care as well, and, family group conferencing to make sure that we're exploring all the options for children to live with their own families. And when children can return to their families, and we do that reunification, that we're doing more of that. So I think there are some areas that we can improve upon and do more in that space to make our services even stronger. But I would hope that the report gives some reassurance that that we're running a good service in terms of our children looked after with our partners, on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you, Di. Questions? Diana, Councillor Tremaine.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a few things, but I won't raise them all. I'll let other people have a say as well. But I should declare an interest as a member of the fostering panel, I think, because it's something that I'm going to talk about in a second. I think there's loads of really good positives in this report, and the detail's really helpful, I think. And it follows on from the corporate parenting board last week, where again this was kind of discussed, and I think it shows that that board is taking kind of some of the feedback that's come through recently really seriously. And in terms of fostering, I suppose I wanted to highlight those positives in terms of us getting more mainstream carers coming through now, and already in the last couple of meetings, last couple of panels we've had, we've been looking at mainstream carers. So I think those figures, all being well, should be well up, and that's sort of testament to the hard work that's gone into it, and to kind of the council being proactive, I think, in terms of that. I suppose one thing I wanted to just ask about, having had the quarterly caseload report just the other day, was that the largest number of vacancies also seem to be in the fostering team, and I know that's being kind of managed, and we get regular updates on that. But I suppose I'm just aware that obviously we don't want that to have a negative impact on assessing and supporting our kind of foster carers, because that relationship of foster carers with their social worker is absolutely key. And that, if there are issues, it is sometimes when that's kind of perhaps changed because somebody's left or moved on or something. So those were kind of some of the points around fostering. I just wanted to raise one more point now, as it's something to come back to, was just the figures around children looked after offending, where we seem to be a little bit higher than our neighbours in terms of the percentage on that. So, and I can see that there's obviously lots of work going in to address that and support that. So I just wondered how that's going in terms of kind of the impact, and if we're sort of at the point to see any kind of positives from that yet, or if that's something perhaps we can look at further down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I'll take the point about the fostering team first. You're right, Councillor Tremaine. It's probably the one area of the service where we've had a bit more instability in the fostering teams than the other. The child protection teams, what we call our locality teams, who are mainly doing the heavy lifting of the child protection work and the court work, have had a lot of recruitment and are seeing more stability. And yes, we've got a lot of newly qualified social workers in there, but we've got good arrangements to support them. I think in the fostering service, we've probably got probably more experienced social workers in there who've perhaps been recorded out quite a long time, rather than newer social workers. And what we've got with that, together with that, we've got some issues relating to long-term sickness. So obviously I won't want to go into any details that are personal, but we have got a few members of that team, few members of staff who have, for various different reasons really, and some relate to some serious illness, have got some long-term sickness issues. So obviously we're working with HR on that and working with the managers, and we're trying to make sure we've got, you know, cover arrangements in place. Interestingly, that's where we've had to keep more of the agency staff. You know, we've managed to let other agency staff go as we've done the permanent recruitment to social workers, but we've still got some agency workers working in the fostering team. Yeah, we're looking at that really and working at it all the time. And I take your point, we've got to keep, you know, we've got to keep that team strong, and we've got to keep that team supported because of the important work that they're doing. There is a new service manager who's recently come in to oversee that area. Sarah Grant is an interim, and we will be appointing permanently to that role soon. We had Lucy Kavanagh before. Many of you will know Lucy, but Lucy successfully got a promotion to work in another authority. So she's gone to be a head of service in another authority. So Sarah's come in, and I think just with, you know, fresh eyes and being new, Sarah's looking at that, and she's working really closely with those managers in the fostering team and working with HR and looking at everything that we need to do there. So we're hoping that position will improve. Yeah, in terms of our you know, looks after children and their offending, I guess, you know, this will be a factor that's, you're right, the rates are a little bit higher than perhaps some of our statistical neighbours. What I would say is our Youth Justice Board were very closely cited on this. And Dan Smith, who's the service manager who manages the Youth Justice Service and the Youth Service, works really closely. We'll work so closely together, you know, as part of my SLT, and works with David Chambers and obviously Guy, who are supporting primarily our children looked after. Yeah, so I think there's lots of work going on to pick that up as an issue and look at that between the looked after children's service and between the Youth Justice Service. Probably too early days to see what results we're getting from that, you know, in terms of the question. I think it's probably an area we might want to keep under review and keep some scrutiny over, and perhaps, you know, bring that back in a future conversation, if that's all right. And if members want some more detail on that, I can get some more detail to you of the work that's being done in that area.
Thank you, Di.
Could I just say as well, could I just say really quick, the fostering team, social workers are fantastic, and you know, I have huge admiration for all the work they do, because it's such an important job. So
thank you, Councillor. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the figures around adoption, and particularly the length of time that it has taken between entering care and moving in with the adoptive family, because that has increased enormously over the last few years. We always seem to have been above the national average, although I appreciate we haven't got up-to-date national average figures. But it does seem quite a substantial amount of time. I mean, 539 days, I appreciate that's an average, but even so, it is a long time for a child to potentially not have the stability that an adoptive family might give them. So do you have any idea why our numbers are so far above the national averages? And what, in addition to what we're already doing, can we do about it? And I will have to swap devices because my iPad's going to die if I don't. So, but I'll do that after this question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Foster. Yes, this obviously, in terms of our performance, this is an area that we are aware of, because, you know, again, as I say, generally our performance pretty much on the whole is strong. But in this area, it is an area we very much aware that we need to improve upon. And I think some of the numbers here don't give out, that gives a national average. It doesn't tend to give the statistical neighbours and the regional average, which I think are probably closer to ours, although I would say Calderdale is probably even some bit, a little way above those. I think that the numbers are relatively probably small in Calderdale, that of children who do end up going through to adoption. Because we're a smaller authority, we don't have those larger numbers that maybe some other authorities have. And what that tends to mean is when you've got, you know, some cases or a few cases that really do extend in the court process, and we do have some of that become really complex, or as we're going through that court process, then maybe we have an initial plan for adoption, but then we have other family members who then come forward or need to be assessed, or the court process doesn't go perhaps the way we quite expected, and the judge and others are wanting to explore either additional assessments or trying children back with their families, which does happen on occasions, before we eventually end up with a clear plan for adoption and being able to move children on. All that is becoming elongated, and if it affects just a sort of a small group of children, if you know what I mean, it skews the figures because the numbers are relatively small anyway. So we only need a couple of cases like that who get really extended at court, then it kind of pushes our averages right up. So that's part of the explanation. And of course, what I would say is we are aware of this in the service. We're working with One Adoption, who we work with very closely in terms of trying to make really timely decisions for children. And I think, in general, we had Ofsted came and looked at our did a focus visit on our processes in May of last year, 23. And obviously part of that, they were looking at our child protection, child in need, but what we call our PLO, which is the public law outline. So the stage before we get to court. So what Ofsted were looking in that focus visit was our timely decision making at each of those points, and we don't have drift and delay, and that includes deciding when children need to come into care, and often we might have a plan for adoption. So that was very positive, that focus visit for us. So we know we've got that reassurance about the timeliness of decision making. I think what sometimes happens is when cases get to court, it gets a bit taken out of our hands. So I think what the factors that we can affect, and in terms of making sure we've got really effective family finding for children, and we're working with One Adoption around that. We've got timely decisions when children, we agree that children need to be placed for adoption. I think sometimes it's the actual court process itself, and particularly when cases are contested by parents, particularly when other family members come forward at a late stage. These are the factors that tend to take cases off track. And when they do go off track, then that can really elongate those timescales. And you're absolutely right. It's far too long for any child to be waiting for an adoptive family. So, we're working really hard to reduce that figure. And I'd expect over the next 12 months, we'd see that figure coming down.
Thank you, Di. I have some questions if nobody else does. Great news on reducing the external residential by 10. That's fantastic. But do we have any costings on those, and also on the 59 external fostering placements? Could those figures be provided?
Yes, certainly, Councillor Prashad. I wouldn't want to quote figures now. I'd rather get the costings to you, if that's all right. Yeah, that's fine. Because we do regularly look at that. Obviously, we monitor that and we look at that all the time. And that's what I said. That's where we're aware that those figures have increased, and particularly for some of those young people who present a range of complexities and maybe more challenging behaviour. What we often then is we're often in a situation where we're asking for either a solo placement for that young person, so they're on their own in a provision, or they're having like 2-to-1 care. So it's not as though those children are just easily going into homes with 4 or 5 other children, but that's what also adds to the expense, if you like, because we're just getting a solo placement just for them. So it's not uncommon that we're being quoted placements of anything upwards of £6,000 a week. That can be £7,000, £8,000, £9,000, £10,000 a week for those young people, depending on what their very complex needs are. Now, of course, we know what we do is we don't we don't agree to those placements unless we have absolutely no alternative. And for some children, sadly, there is no alternative. But what we're trying to do is make sure we're very diligent in those costings. We're very challenging in terms of those arrangements that we make through commissioning for children for those placements. We're also doing a bit better to get joint funding. So we did start a joint funding panel last year, just to let people know, and I'd share that once a month. And again, we can get you some data, because that would probably help you. But what we know is we've got more arrangements now which are jointly funded with health and with education, which does help. I know it's still a drain on the ICB, but it slightly helps the local authority, you know, costings, because we're jointly funding for those young people where they've got complex health needs. That's right, you know, that's right that we're doing that, or they've got clear diagnosis that need that support. So no, we can get that to you, absolutely.
Brilliant. I suppose we all know that fostering placements are the ideal option for most of the children and the authority. How can the authority improve the offer for foster parents and special guardianship foster carers?
Well, I think we've done, I mean, I'll let Councillor Wilkinson come in if he wants to in a moment, because we've had lots of discussions around this, I guess. I mean, in terms of the offer for our foster carers, I do think, as I say, we have quite a strong offer. I think we've reviewed, you know, the fees that we pay our foster carers in Calderdale. I think we are competitive, you know, with our local neighbours and even with the IFAs now. So Sarah Grant, who's recently come to us, mentioned the service manager. She was looking at this, and obviously she has experience of recently working in another authority more in the Midlands, and understands the fees and what the independent fostering agencies pay. And she said, you know, we're pretty competitive even with the independent fostering agencies now, particularly when you take the council tax exemption, you know, in as part of that. So it is difficult to know. I think it's I'm not sure it's all about money. I do think what we're trying to do with the fostering team, they do offer peer support, and they do have some robust peer support work going on. Also with the Calderdale Fostering Care Association, who provide excellent support for our foster carers. But I just wonder whether we just need to look at that in terms of robust arrangements. And some areas have a project called Mockingbird. I think Calderdale did try Mockingbird for a while, and for whatever reasons we didn't feel that it worked for Calderdale before I came to work here. But Mockingbird is again a sort of an approach where you have a, you know, hub and spoke model, they call it, but you sort of have a hub foster carer, and you have you have a cluster of foster carers around that hub. The hub person is obviously very, very experienced and really trained up well, and they sort of act as a peer supporter really to, you know, the network of foster carers around them, and that cluster of foster carers acts like a bit of a support unit. So they're not just relying on the fostering social worker or the local authority, but they're really actively supporting each other. And for the children, they experience like our children would within one of our own families a bit more. You know, they go for tea with a different foster care, or they go for a weekend stay, or they go for an overnight. So there's a little bit of respite support, and that support you would get with aunties and uncles, really. I do think it's perhaps a model that we could look at again, or our own version of it, or think about how it might work. So I think there's more to do on the peer support front. I'm not sure in terms of what else Calderdale could be doing, because you know, I do think the offer is fairly strong. I think there is, what we've seen is a national drop off in people coming forward to be foster carers. I think, you know, all the challenges families had, I think a lot of foster parents found it very, very difficult you know, during COVID. I'm sure they did. It was interesting, we got a bit of a spike of interest after the John Lewis Christmas advert last year. So just even the national advertising on the TV, which was a lovely Christmas advert about fostering, there was a little spike of interest seen nationally. But again, I think following that, we've seen it tailing off. So I don't know, but we are always open to suggestions, and, you know, we're always wanting to increase the pool of foster carers. So
okay, thanks, Di. Councillor Atkinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's one around the unaccompanied asylum seekers. Just around the process, is it Home Office led? Is there extra funding that comes with it and resources?
Yeah, yes, Councillor Atkinson. Yes, there is. Yes, so it is Home Office led, and basically we're on a, you know, it's a national scheme. We're on a kind of rota, if you like. So Calderdale, like every other authority up and down the country, has to take its quota. So when it comes around to our turn, you know, then we'll be asked to take, you know, 1 unaccompanied asylum seeker or 2 unaccompanied asylum seeker children. Sometimes that's more than others. So sometimes we might have a month where we're not asked to take any. but then the following month we might be down to take 2 or 3. And on that rota, the numbers of what the Home Office done is, obviously because of all the difficulties, as we know, down in Kent and children arriving in the country, that quota number has gradually increased, over the last 12 months. So we're being expected to take more. That's the reality. Sometimes children do, unaccompanied asylum seekers just arrive. We know that, don't we, in Calderdale? So they might turn up at some of the hotels or the bed and breakfast in the town centre, and they might then present to us and say, well, I'm under 18, I'm a child, I need some accommodation. So basically the process is we would assess them, and there is a recognised way to assess unaccompanied asylum seeking children to check if they're under 18. It's not perfect. It's an art. It's not a science. We can't kind of extract their teeth and test their teeth and do a test to see how old they are. They usually arrive with a set of documents. Sometimes those documents, birth certificates, are genuine. Sometimes they're not. But part of all the assessment work that the social workers do for the screening is try to determine, is that a young person who needs our sanctuary, who needs our support and our care, and we would then pay for their placement, or actually are they an older person? So yeah, we do get a bit of funding towards them. It doesn't usually cover the cost of what it costs us to accommodate them. We get so much money per asylum seeker, but quite often what we're having to do for those young people is we're having to buy places for them in like kind of supported living arrangements, or some accommodation for them. Obviously, because usually they're over 16, they're between 16 and 18. So if they go to supported living, often that's out of our authority. It might be in Leeds, it might be in Bradford, and it's usually 9 times out of 10, it will be costing us more than we're getting back from the Home Office. So that's where we're getting that incremental, expense to Calderdale, I suppose. And we're not alone in that. There's lots of conversations. I know Julie has as well with her DCS colleagues in the region, and conversations that go back to the Home Office about all the pressures, but it is a national programme.
Okay, thank you, Di. Councillor Foster.
Thank you. So I just wanted to ask quickly about children missing from placement. What is the parameter for missing? So how is it sort of a certain number of hours, or is it a certain incident, or not being home from time at school on time, or how do we establish that a child is missing from their placement? And the second paragraph of that says that 3 attempts are made to contact the child and their parents or carers. So what happens if you're not able to contact anybody after those 3 times? What do you do then? Clearly if they're not there, then they're still missing, aren't they? So I'm presuming that you don't just abandon them and say, oh well, never mind then. So can you just fill in a little bit more
gaps?
Thank you.
Yeah. So we have quite a robust process for missing. We have set procedures in how we work with missing children, and we have we work very closely with our police colleagues. We have a missing officer who's a police officer who works very closely with us as part of our team, who work with our children. So we work with children who go missing who are not in care, obviously, as well as children who are in care. But of course, our children in care get our very, if you like, special attention, although we're worried about all children who go missing. So those are, as that paragraph tries to explain, there are kind of regular meetings to discuss those. There's regular missing meetings. They happen on a weekly basis, multi-agency meetings. So we're cited on all of that. There is a sort of criteria, I guess, for when children are reported missing. So, if I'm just going to give an example, the child's in one of our children's homes and they are allowed to go out for the evening, but they're expected to be home, I don't know, by 9 o'clock. we would, there's an agreement that the home has a period of time, like a reasonable parent would, to give leeway, but they've still not come back by 9:30 or 9:45. The home are concerned, they've tried to contact them, they're not in touch. So obviously that gets reported to the police. So it's just like, it would be the same as if a parent was reporting to the police. And then, the process kicks off really. Now, clearly, and there is an expectation, because we have these regular conversations with the police, and there are certain protocols around how we're working with missing young people across West Yorkshire. And again, the police would expect us to act as reasonable parents and, try and check out that they're not with the family, or they're not with the friends, or, wherever they are, to sort of go looking in a sense, which we do, and our staff would do, and our carers would do, and our residential staff would do all of those things. If they're missing for a certain length of time, and there's, we're concerned about there's no contact, for more than sort of, if it's 24 hours, or sometimes it's less, or they've been missing a certain number of times, sort of 3 times within a short period, we would have a strategy meeting with the police. So, we step it up, if you like, to our strategy meetings, which is quite a high level process for risk management, really. So I think those risks are quite closely managed. It doesn't happen often, but occasionally we have a child who's missing, and we have no contact, and we can be quite worried about them. The police will ask us if they can do a media alert. So we'll start putting those alerts out in the media. The police will do that. I mean, the police manage that process really. And then every attempt is made to bring them back. Usually that happens within a short period of time. Once it's all over social media, they get kind of flushed out. And 9 times out of 10, they are with friends, with an associate, or maybe with a family member. So, it's not unusual for some of our children to test those boundaries or get upset because they've had a bad day at school and something happens. But following that missing episode, they're always given an independent return home interview. So they sit with our early help team. And again, that's a statutory requirement that every child in care and every child who goes missing has an offer of an independent return home. So that's somebody who can check out independently, well, what's going on, what led up to that, are you unhappy at school, are you unhappy in your foster home, because we're trying to prevent further episodes, trying to minimize them.
Okay, thank you, Di. I've just realized I've missed a question on exclusions, so I apologize. There doesn't seem to be any information there on absenteeism. Is this being treated separately in a separate report? Perhaps Julie could enlighten us.
It is, Chair. You have taken a previous report on school attendance, and it is very much a focus of the government since September. There have been some changes to the duties of the local authority. So it is something that you may want to look at in a bit more detail in a separate report. So yes, we do a lot of work, and it's in Parveen's remit, but it is separate to exclusions. And we've got a focused education welfare service, a small one that does support schools with attendance. So it's something that you may want to look at in the future.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think with regard to fostering, I think I'd like to put that back on the work programme for next year if possible. I think it's something that we should be working on, try and get the numbers up and, help the budget. Okay, can I now move on to item 8? And we have a report by Councillor Tremaine. It's an interim report on recommendations on emotional well-being and mental health of children and young people in Calderdale. So fire away, Diana.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware it's been a long meeting, so this is a really important piece of work, and it does tie in really well with where we're at and what we've covered this evening. First of all, this is the interim report. The full report will be coming hopefully in March, but we felt really strongly that a lot of work has gone into this already, and we've got some kind of clear recommendations which we really wanted to bring so that some action can be taken on those and that they can progress forward, hopefully. But firstly, I wanted to say a massive thank you to all the people that we've met as part of this review. We've done, I think, about 21 different visits, plus some other internal meetings with offices and things. And the scope of that is pretty huge, because within some of those we've met, you know, large groups of children. We've kind of talked to people across schools. So there's been a huge amount of young people and children, young people that we've met as part of this, and massive thanks go to them, because one of the things we often talk about is hearing more from children and young people who may not all be able to come and sit in our meetings, but it's really important that we hear their voices. A big thank you to people, the members of the review group, some of whom are here and some of whom are not on CYP but have contributed hugely. And also want to say a big thank you to Ben for all his work, and to Naomi as well, because we've worked really closely with Naomi from Public Health, and I'm going to bring Naomi in a minute, whether she likes it or not. But just a few kind of extra points, really. We've taken very much an appreciative inquiry approach to this piece of work, in terms of thinking about some of the issues, but thinking about how those are being addressed and dealt with in positive ways. So in spite of the numerous challenges that we've been hearing about, we've got some really good examples of good practice which can be shared, I think, as a result of this. And so that approach, I think, is a really helpful one from Scrutiny. And I think the range of this, in terms of the number of people we've visited, has been a really valuable part of our work as a kind of scrutiny board, to go out and actually see what's happening beyond our meetings here. We've met and engaged with partners right across the board, from schools, healthcare provision, public health, youth provision. And I think that's really highlighted the importance of all those partnerships and how they work together. So some of the recommendations relate to connectivity. But one of the key things I think that has come out of it is just the value and the importance of listening, and actually spending time listening to individuals, to young people, about some of the things that they're dealing with. And certainly from schools in particular, we've had really positive feedback and appreciation of the fact that we have gone and spent time actually just listening to them talk through some of those things that they're dealing with. And again, that comes through a little bit in terms of the recommendations, in terms of actually being more connected and how we engage with other people. Lots of issues we've already heard about tonight, the complexities of what all providers are dealing with, not just schools, obviously, those dealing with kind of mental health support, post-pandemic in particular. Obviously, those things have increased. And certainly in terms of schools and youth provision, we've had lots of conversations about other factors like facilities, the things that make life harder for them in their roles. And key questions, I suppose, come up in terms of emotional well-being and mental health, in terms of how everybody accesses the support that they need. So the recommendations kind of address some of those points. I wanted to sort of ask Naomi to come in here, because it's been really invaluable to have this as a kind of a piece of work where we've been engaging right across children and young people, but also engaging with public health and how those areas work together. And it's been really important in terms of thinking about issues like single point of contact in terms of access, and things like the family hubs. So that whole point about how we might connect things better has really tied in very closely with some of the work that Naomi's been doing in terms of public health. So did you want to come in on that a little bit, Naomi, before we just go through the recommendations a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Tremaine. The review, from my perspective, was really timely. It came at, I don't think it could have come at a better time. It began at a time when we were having conversations, public health, with our NHS partners in the Calderdale Cares Partnership, about how we can best work together in the post-pandemic world to strengthen the health and wellbeing support that is in place across Calderdale. Building strong foundations in prevention and early intervention, really, and looking at how we can really harness what we've got in Calderdale to do that, to avoid need escalating. And that was something that was really important for me when I got involved in the review is that what we were looking at wasn't just why demand for specialist services is high, why waiting lists are long, but actually looking more upstream at what's going well. What are those strengths in our communities that we can harness and do more of and work to support, and what is that early intervention that we can maximise and really strengthen. The timing of the review, I suppose, it gave us almost a unique opportunity to ask that members scrutinise not just the end product of those conversations that we're having with NHS partners, but actually to influence the direction that work takes. So in that respect, the work and the learning from young people and those people who support our young people has been absolutely invaluable. You know, that we couldn't have done that without members doing this in-depth review when it came. The conversations that we were having with NHS commissioning partners have now, in no small part because of the review, actually become an extensive programme of work, and are really driving that move, that ambition towards integrated delivery across public health, across CAMHS services, and actually wider. You know, we're looking at how best we work with children's social care, for example, the early help bit of the children's social care world, to make sure that we're supporting young people, again, to stop emotional wellbeing need escalating into mental health crisis.
Thank you, Naomi. That's really helpful, and there'll be, hopefully, if anyone's got any questions, they can come to those. So I really just want to kind of bring you the recommendations just really briefly, and then if anyone's got any questions, and then I'm hoping that people will be minded to recommend that approve those to be passed on to Cabinet and all the various other providers who I think they will be really impactful for. So one of the key things was around connectivity, which was just that there's so much good practice out there, and people were often kind of saying, well, I'd really like to be able to get this extra support. It would be really invaluable for me to speak to someone about, for example, and it ties in, I think, with the questions around exclusions and things. Is there someone, I can speak to just informally, so as beyond the provision that we have within the council as well, so those kind of things came up. So are there ways in which providers can meet each other, support each other in different ways? And that comes up within the recommendations and the kind of connectivity and the empowerment aspect. So sort of in forums which school staff or those involved in youth provision could be involved in. And one of the things we were very aware of, budgets are extremely tight. There isn't a lot of money out there, but actually the recommendations which we've brought are ones which we feel are achievable and really impactful without saying this is going to cost vast amounts of money. It's not about that. It's actually about building relationships, a lot of it, and about encouraging really fruitful kind of collaboration and engagement across the different partners that are working here. We were kind of really aware about that whole role of trusted adults and how significant they are within communities, within schools, within local areas, and how it was really important to kind of highlight that role and make things as easy as possible for people to draw on those trusted adults, and for them to support young people kind of through whatever they may be going through in terms of needing further access and support. So that was a kind of key aspect there. And we really kind of wanted to stress as well in terms of kind of access and building relationships, that, where appropriate, members, officers do get as involved as possible in terms of their local, local schools, local provision, make those connections, because actually that whole listening process has been absolutely probably the key thing, I think, out of this project in many ways. Just the importance of spending that time and listening really carefully to both the adults, but especially to the young people here. And then the kind of longer term, I think really area that could have a huge impact is this working towards kind of single point of contact in terms of access to really improve that right across the board. Have partners who are sort of understanding what they're all doing, understanding how they work together, able to ask questions when they need to and to support each other. And that single point of contact where, you know, people will find, hopefully, it a lot easier to kind of find the support that they need. So it doesn't mean that there aren't challenges, and we'll bring some further recommendations forward. But I think that these recommendations tonight are a really good starting point. And as Naomi says, there's something actually which Scrutiny has helped to shape where this is going. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing that we feel that we can have that impact as a Scrutiny board. So I'd like to say thank you to everyone for all the work they've done on this. And if anyone's got any questions, please fire away.
Thank you, Diana. Any questions? Okay, I'd like to propose that the recommendations in this report go to, or the final report go to Cabinet, and whether we can vote on that, please. All those in favour?
Can I think we want these recommendations to go to Cabinet as they are, so the interim recommendations to go to Cabinet, and then the final ones will kind of come through and be added on later, if that's okay, Chair.
So could we have a vote on the interim recommendations going to Cabinet, please? Okay. I think that's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. The final item tonight is the 2023-24 work programme to be presented by Ben. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Before I talk about the work programme, I just wanted to confirm that I've made a note of picking up some things from the meeting, picking up with Julie about getting some kind of updated report from the inclusion working group, and picking up with her as well about absenteeism. And there were a couple of items for me that I've noted down for me to pick up with Di, particularly as well. And I'll get on and do that before the next scrutiny meeting. And of course, I'll confirm with members as and when that's going to happen. And I've also noted your request to get fostering on the work programme for the next municipal year. And I'll liaise with Di and her team about how we might frame that and when we might bring it on. As always, if members have anything in particular they would like to be put onto the work programme or any suggestions for any review work, please would they drop me an email and let me know. I'm happy to discuss that with them further. As members will probably be aware, and particularly after tonight, we have another packed agenda at the next Scrutiny Board meeting where Naomi's coming again to talk about the EHNA results, and we're having the SACRE report and another item as well. And if Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Ben. It was just about the SACRE report. Given that Sheila has had to leave early tonight for another meeting, I just wondered if you could just check in with her about a potential meeting clash and put the SACRE report at an appropriate point on the agenda, as we can deal with it first if needs be, and if that's all right with the chair. It's just there's no point bringing it last if she's left. If she's had.
I'll liaise with Sheila, and I'll liaise with the chair as well, Councillor Foster, on that matter. No problem. And at the moment we don't have anything specific on the agenda for April, though I am discussing with Julie's team about bringing exam results into the April meeting. Members will be aware, however, that the April meeting may be subject to the pre-election period, so I'm seeking clarification from Ian Hughes as to whether that meeting is likely to actually occur. And as always, if any members have any queries about anything that's been raised tonight, want to follow anything up, if they would drop me an email, and I'll liaise with the relevant officers to get any information that they want.
Thank you, Ben. I would like to raise a point, and I would like to suggest that regular meetings between Julie and Councillor Wilkinson and myself, so that I can be kept up to date with any issues arising which affect CYP. I wonder whether that would be possible.
I can see Julie is nodding.
That's not a problem. That's not a problem, Councillor Prashad. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll liaise with both Julie and Councillor Wilkinson as to try and make that happen.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Well, I think that's all for tonight. We've overrun a little bit, so just leaves me to wish you all a good night.
Councillor Prashad, can I just jump in very, very quickly?
Yeah.
Just very quickly on the review that Councillor Tremaine is leading. As members will be aware, because I've been emailing them, members of the review group and other councillors as well, will be aware I have been emailing quite a lot recently about future visits coming up, and there will be more emails coming around about that. So please look out for them in your inboxes.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Okay. All right. Okay, everybody. Thank you very much for attending, and good night to everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Everyone.
Thank you for the high quality of the report.